I would like to now introduce you to Catharine Hydon. Catharine is the Director and Principal Consultant at Hydon Consulting. Over the last 10 years, she's worked at a range of organisations and governments to understand and articulate quality and inspire change. With a master's in early childhood education, Catharine has extensive experience in the early childhood sector, beginning as a teacher in a kindergarten program in the northern suburbs of Melbourne, to lead roles in a range of services and projects for children and their families. Welcome, Catharine.
Thanks very much, Rachel. I'm going to start sharing my screen, so hopefully you can all see that as we get going. So hello, everybody. It's fantastic to be here. And I can see that there's quite a number of people online already. So if you haven't yet introduced yourself, you could take an opportunity to do that. Open up the chat space and make sure you click on everyone so everyone can see that you're saying hello to everybody. Let people know who you are. Let people know what you're thinking about today. You might have ideas from Anthony's conversation with you just before. You might have questions, which would be fantastic to put into the chat as well. So we'll take a bit of a look at that as we get going. So as I get started, I'd like to particularly acknowledge the traditional owners on whose country I'm on here in Melbourne. My country here is the lands of the Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and I particularly want to pay my respects to elders past and present, and the elders who help us as early childhood educators in family daycare contexts and broadly across the early childhood community to incorporate First Nations perspectives into our daily pedagogical practice. Many of you, of course, are undertaking that on a daily basis, and a big shout out to you if you're doing that. If you haven't yet explored that idea, then please take an opportunity to think about how you might incorporate those perspectives into your everyday practice. So as Rochelle said, my task today here is, in the time that we have, to explore a really big idea, an idea about your own well-being and about thinking in terms of educators tuning into their own well-being to take care of yourself and to think about what that might look like. I know this is a really big subject matter and something that, of course, has been very high on our agenda given the time of COVID. So some of you will be right in the middle of trying to navigate that in a family daycare context that is more complex, because you are trying to not only navigate what's happening in the early childhood space, but you're also doing it in your own home. So this is really a complex space, and I want to just take a moment to have a think a little bit about wellbeing, what we mean by it, and what we mean by educators taking time and tuning into their own well-being. If you have a piece of paper and a pen handy, that's really helpful, because it just gives you an opportunity to take some notes about the things that you're learning today. And again, big shout out also to Family Daycare New South Wales for putting this opportunity together for you to participate in this professional learning opportunity. We know that professional learning is something that really enhances practice, and thank you very much for everybody for taking the time to join us today. So let's just take a little bit of a think about where we're at in relation to the sort of wellbeing landscape, if you like. And one of the things that strikes me about all of this conversation, particularly in a time of COVID, but generally speaking about early childhood educator wellbeing, is that it can really only be understood backwards. You sort of have to live it and then look back on it and try to understand and determine what those ideas mean in practice. So in the moment, we can sometimes be trying to do many, many things and trying to respond to children, respond to families, respond to the expectations of the National Quality Standard, respond to your organisation's expectations, respond to the community's expectations, respond to COVID and the challenges that places, but also generally what families and children are asking of us. Not only that, but we're also thinking about responding in the moment to our own children, our own families, our own communities. And we sort of live it, and then we need to take a little moment to look back on it and think about what that meant for us. So we can understand it, we live it forwards, and we understand it backwards. And for that process, we need to also think about, at times, stepping into uncertainty. It's going to be at times uncertain times. We need to be mindful of the fact that when we get together in opportunities like this, in a collegial way and with the support of each other and opening up this space for ongoing dialogue, give ourselves an opportunity to understand what it means to create certainty in the uncertainty, to create security or a sense of well-being amongst all of that uncertainty. So I don't want to suggest to you by any means that there are no islands of certainty within your family daycare practice. I'm sure there is. So things that you create on a daily basis that are times to check in and to ground yourself with children and their families. And in fact, children will need that from you as well. And many of you are really good at welcoming children into that space and helping children to create their own security and certainty. But we also have to do that for ourselves as well. But we have to do that in the context of reflective practice, which is why putting this on the agenda for this conference is a really fantastic idea. It's a fantastic idea given what we increasingly know about the status of wellbeing and the state of wellbeing of educators generally. It's also fantastic that it's on the agenda given the complex times that we've been living in over 2 years of COVID. It's not over yet, though, so we've still got those things to navigate as we move into 2022. So that point really is an important one to start with, is to say we are doing what we do on a daily basis. We need to pause, we need to look back at what our experience has been. And partly this opportunity here is for you to say, how am I traveling within my own wellbeing? What do I think about that? What do I know about that? And I'm going to give you some ideas and suggestions about how to navigate some of that space as we move forward. But also, I want to suggest that we are really we're influential, if you like, and we can be active in creating our own well-being. Now, it's not just your responsibility, though. We need to take collective responsibility for that. We need to look out for each other. I'm going to talk a bit more about that as we get going. But I do want to suggest that this is a really rich, reflective space that we can inhabit when we get together in these sorts of conversations. The other thing that's really important in this sort of contextualising of wellbeing for early childhood educators, those who work in family daycare contexts, is that we need to think about the idea of taking time to care for ourselves. Now, you might be like me and you might be thinking, well, is that an okay thing to do? Because we should be here to support the rights and best interests of children. Absolutely. And we're going to talk a bit more about that when I talk to you a bit later about children's rights. But it's not a competition between children's rights and your rights, your well-being and children's well-being, families' well-being and your well-being. What we want to do is make sure that we are thinking about everybody's well-being in this context. So we want to really bust the myth early that well-being and tuning into yourself and thinking about your own well-being is actually doing children a disservice. It's actually doing children a service. We are actually supporting children's well-being by tuning into our own. And it's not that we place ourselves at the front and centre of everything that happens, because we still want to make sure that children's rights and best interests are paramount, as the guiding principles of the National Quality Standard ask us to do. We want to make sure that we are thinking first and foremost about the most vulnerable citizens, or the youngest citizens in our care, very young children. But we don't want to make it a competition between what they are experiencing and what we are experiencing, because increasingly the evidence that is coming from all sorts of different places, including some fantastic researchers here in Australia, who are trying to really understand what the context of educator wellbeing has been in the last little while, in COVID definitely, but beyond that into the last 10 years or so, what do we understand about the way that educators navigate this space? We want to we understand that your well-being is closely attuned to outcomes for children, to well-being outcomes for children. The more we understand our own well-being, the more we create processes that build our resilience and build our sense of well-being, then the more equipped we can be to navigate, to understand, to support, to look after the complexities, joys, opportunities, dimensions of children's learning and families' connection with you. So we want to see them as, if you like, connected very deeply. I know that some of us are really good at this, and those of you who already have really good suggestions about your well-being, now is the time to share them. If you're in the chat at the moment and you've got a couple of ideas about the things that you do to really support your own well-being, and by that we mean, fill your cup. That's a really great analogy. It's used very widely now. We've got to fill our own cup in order to fill somebody else's. We've got to feel strong about who we are and feel that really deep sense of connection to our space and our community, our people. So that real sense of purpose and connection. So those sorts of ideas are really important. If you've got things that you do, you might say, well, I always make sure I go for a walk, in the evening. I take my dog for a walk. I feel like that's really good. I make sure I have a cup of tea at really early in the morning before the children arrive. And I've got a particular place I go. I sit right there and I look out the window, and I really like that. I've got a lovely backyard, and I look there. I spend time with children. I spend time with my own children. I spend time with families. I spend time with friends. I garden. I cook. What are the things you do? We all do different things, of course, but they're really fantastic things to be able to know that you do, to be able to fill your own cup before you indeed fill children's. And I do want to really emphasize the fact that we don't want to have two different conversations here about children's wellbeing and families' wellbeing, and then your wellbeing as secondary or a lot further down the track. It's much, much more important for us to think about those things as working in collaboration, or, if you like, two sides of the same coin. And again, the research is really telling us that we need to pay attention to this, and that indeed is both something that we can do, but also that the system can also be a part of that conversation. And some of these things that I'm going to talk about are not only things that you can do yourself, but they're also things that we know work in the broader context. So they're part of your family daycare context broadly, your service context, the way that you might work in collaboration with your other colleagues in family daycare, your coordinator team, your educational leader. So in fact, your fellow family daycare educators, when you get together, I'm sure some of you are probably going to tell us that when you do get together with your colleagues in family daycare, be it at a playgroup setting or you meet in the park, that's also a really fantastic way to fill your cup, to feel a bit stronger about your sense of well-being. But let's make it really clear here that we're not in a competition space. We really want to support your identity and your wellbeing identity, but also the children's wellbeing identity as well. So the other thing that I think is worth noting here is that we're increasingly seeing very strong data telling us something about educator wellbeing. Now, I don't want to overwhelm you with statistics and things like that, but I do want to suggest to you that there is more information and more research coming through. And I know that there is some work happening in the Victorian government to understand a bit more about this. We know that Tamara Cumming and Sandy Wong from Macquarie University and Charles Sturt University are looking at this in their educator wellbeing work. We can see things coming out of the United States because of their experience of COVID. I think generally there's a much greater sense of what we mean by educator wellbeing, which is good news. And it's actually using knowledge of what we know about wellbeing and connecting it to the lived experience of educators like you. Now, I don't mean for you to dive into these some of you might really want to have a look at this. And again, some really fantastic resources in places like BU. So if you haven't had a look at some of those things, I really encourage you to. And actually, generally in the community more broadly, we are trying to talk about wellbeing more, to say that it's everybody's responsibility. Everybody should be thinking about other people, but also we can do some things to support our own wellbeing. But here's what we know about wellbeing and educators. It's interesting that there's some research happened right at the height of COVID coming out of the United States, in fact, out of Minnesota. And I've just sort of tuned into this because I thought it was particularly relevant for us today, because I'm talking to you as early childhood educators who work in family daycare contexts. It's worth noting that they did actually ask some of the questions around family daycare context. Some of these things will probably be not a surprise to you, but some of the comments that they mentioned was that the providers who were more confident in implementing, say, COVID health and safety practices were more likely to be anxious. So it's interesting to think about. This has been an anxious time because you've had to do a whole lot of really different things, and it's actually, you're more confident, but sometimes you can feel quite anxious about whether you're getting it right. I just want to acknowledge that. I think it's a really important thing, but it may not be the case for you, but it was certainly something that came out of that Minnesota work. And family daycare providers were less likely to be anxious than centre providers, which is really interesting. And maybe that goes to the fact that you're in your own home and you can really guide some of the conversations that happen in your setting and how you might manage that. Rural and urban providers had similar feelings of anxiousness in this time. So it's not necessarily where you live. Some of those things, and of course, we know that in the time of COVID, I think it's important to note that the experiences of this type of process were different in different places, but maybe there were similarities in different geographies across New South Wales and most certainly across Australia. But interestingly also, we're more resilient than we know. A lot of people have reported in this research, but others, is that actually they were able to draw on things that they never thought that they were capable of. So they were surprised sometimes at how well they were going, in the context of this. And for some of us, it's true to say that the time of COVID has given us an opportunity to slow down a bit, is to actually regroup and to think about what actually matters. And I think this goes to the conversations that you were having with Anthony a bit earlier, and the other conversations you might have in this conference, is that there are opportunities for us to rethink and regroup. But also we know that the effective culture and leadership meant that we're more likely to succeed. So if we've got good leaders, and some of you are leaders in a real practice sense, you're leading your colleagues, we're more likely to succeed in this space. So we're probably more likely to have a sense of well-being if we've got a really great culture. So we're already talking to each other, we're already listening carefully and tuning into each other's understandings. We're having great professional learning conversations, and we're really tuned into each other before stressful times occur. So I want to really emphasize that. And again, that's really borne out in some of the work that comes out of Tamara Cummings and Sandy Wong's work in that wellbeing work, is that they are saying the more we connect with each other, the better our wellbeing is. Again, it seems really logical to say that, but I think it's worth noting that how important it is that we have effective leadership and effective relationships and a culture of having each other's back. In fact, the Early Years Learning Framework talks about this in terms of the lively culture of professional inquiry, whereby we're talking to each other all the time, we're listening, we're sharing ideas, and we can generate new ways of doing things and with real energy. And that gives us the things we need in order to navigate the ways forward. But it's also worth noting too that this time, and I'm focusing a little bit on this COVID time because it's so much in our frame of reference, but for some of you, you might want to stretch it out to think about how you've managed your own wellbeing in times, in the last 10 years or so. If you've been working in family daycare for a long time, you might say, how have I managed that? How have I managed to do some of those things? One of the things that I think is really worth noting too, just in the education context more broadly, is that we're more adaptable than we know. We're able to adopt and adapt to new technologies. And hey, this is one of them. Like here we are in the online context. We're sharing ideas in this online space. You are joining us from your own homes, which means that you don't have to necessarily be in travel a long distance. We've actually got some great technology working in our favour, and something that we probably would have had to take years to implement in not a time of crisis, we've actually done so in a matter of weeks. So congratulations everybody for getting that done. And you've probably noticed that you've been more adaptable than you ever thought you could. So this actually goes to a sense of resilience. It goes to a sense of well-being. And it also goes to a sense of how we navigate the next steps. So again, in this space around well-being, it's important to sort of tune in from time to time, not so we get overwhelmed, but tune in to say that people are thinking about it, and researchers are thinking about it, governments are thinking about it, organisations are thinking about it, and hopefully you as family daycare educators can join with your educator colleagues, with the organisations that you're part of, to start talking about what Wellbeing Matters looks like. And it's interesting also to note that I've been hearing a few examples, and maybe you're one of them, and if you are, we'd love to know about that in the chat. So again, keep your ideas coming if you've got really good suggestions about how to do things. Anna has said here she likes to do meditation and soft music and oils. That's a really great suggestion. And Margaret said she likes to make lists and stay organised. Absolutely. And a couple of other people have done lots of things, walking in nature, spending time in the garden. So lots of real crochet. Thanks very much. That's a nice one. Spending time with the dog, meditation. There we go. So lots of you have got some great ideas. So keep sharing those, because for some people, it's fantastic to actually hear from you about what makes sense in your context. And I wanted to also say to you that you might want to raise some of these with your own organisations to say, how about we do something together that's really supporting the well-being of our educator team? You know, what are things that we could do together? How can we put it on the agenda a bit more? And it's certainly for me something that I think would be reflective of an organisation that was committed to exceeding themes in relation to the staffing and the ways that we undertake quality area 4. So if you're a leader online today, it's something that you might want to consider in terms of the way you support educators into the future. So get a sense of the data that's out there, get a sense of the information that's being produced. As I said, BU is a great resource in this context, but also know what else is happening nationally and internationally as well that helps to support this conversation. So the other thing that's important too, just in terms of getting the information, before we start to take a dive into sort of real practicalities, it's helpful also to say, well, what are people saying about educator wellbeing? And again, I'm really sort of excited by the fact that there are some more ideas coming through research, and teachers and educators broadly, leaders, people who lead education contexts, including family daycare, are saying, well, what sort of stuff makes this work? What builds teacher resilience? And if we take this into the family daycare context and say, well, what can we apply these to a family daycare context? So we could say, what do these things apply for educators who work in family daycare? I think you could say, yes, they do indeed apply. So, and it goes to some of the other things that I want to talk about in terms of getting really practical. This research gives us a sense of some of the protective factors or the things that you might do in order to build your own resilience and, in that sense, build your own well-being. So if we're going to take time to think about that, these are sorts of the things we might think about. The first one is believe in what you do. And there is overwhelming research to support the fact that having a strong purpose, and it might mean that you make a list, but having a strong purpose is really helpful in educator resilience and educator wellbeing. It helps you understand what you're here for. You don't do some things, but you do some things because they go straight to the purpose. Where are we finding our purpose? Well, it's in the words of your philosophy, but it's also in My Time, Our Place. It's in the Belonging, Being and Becoming documents. It's in your organisations. It's in your own thinking about what you're trying to do. And what a joyous thing that we get to do. We get to be with children, and that is our purpose. So sometimes in the hullabaloo of a day, we might think, oh, what is my purpose here? My purpose might be, temperature checking, or my purpose might be paperwork. No, documentation is important and complying with the regulations are important, but that's not our purpose. Our purpose is the rights and best interest of children. Our purpose is to enhance and engage children in the learning process. And that is a joyous place. So we want to remind ourselves of our purpose, which of course means the sort of the connection to our daily practice is that we then get an opportunity to stop thinking about the things that can take us away from our purpose and in fact take us away from a sense of well-being, and reconnect with the things that are really purposeful. How do we do that practically? Sometimes that's a conversation with your educational leader. Maybe that's a conversation with your colleague. Maybe that's a conversation with your coordination team. Maybe that's a conversation with your family and say, why did I start doing family day care again? Just trying to remind yourself of some of those things whilst you're taking the dog for a walk. Have a think a little bit about your purpose. If you don't feel like you are purposeful in your family daycare work, well, that's a good opportunity to apply reflective practice and have a conversation with the people around you. Here's another one. Don't take it personally. Some of the, I think this is really good advice, particularly when there are complexities coming from left, right, and centre. There's expectations. It's not a personal attack on you. And I know at family daycare educators from time to time have felt that they are right in the midst of some really significant and tricky times. But it's not personal. It's actually about wanting to make sure that we undertake the rights and best interests of children, and that we are making decisions in our collective or common best interest. So the common good. And I know at times you can feel like all of these changes or all of the expectations are all directed at you. That is not the case, and they are all about making sure that we can fulfill our obligations to children, to young children. So it's helpful just to remind yourself of that from time to time, because if you do take it personally, then you're sort of buying into this idea that everything is out to get you. But I want to remind us that that if we can try really hard not to take it personally, and we can do what we can do with the support and assistance of our services, our coordination team, then it gives you an opportunity to feel a stronger sense of resilience. The other one, which I think many of you feel very strongly about, I'm sure, is to be proud, and be proud of the things that you've done in this time, particularly in the time of COVID. I feel like there is some things that people have achieved which are absolutely extraordinary. And again, you might want to tell us some of those things in the chat. So tell us some of the things that you've experienced in the last little while that you're really proud of, and tell everybody, share that with everybody, and tell people that you're really proud of the work that you've done. It is a cause for celebration. One of the things that we know about wellbeing and resilience is to celebrate the little things, is to be proud of those little things. It's when a child takes a step, celebrate with their families. You might want to celebrate the ways at which children are engaging with other children, or looking after the resources and equipment that you have in your home. Lots of little micro moments that you can celebrate and be very proud of. And of course, that's where documentation of that becomes a really important way to share that proud moment with your families, but also with your colleagues. Share it out there and tell people really proudly of the work you've been doing. At times, I think our colleagues more broadly in early childhood education don't necessarily know what you're up to. So maybe we need to share that conversation a bit more broadly. And I know that many of you have worked really hard in the National Quality Standards space to make sure that your services are continuously improving. And the PD in Your Pocket program that New South Wales Family Daycare has been promoting and working on, I think, are great opportunities for you to celebrate your own practice. And we can see the Facebook page going off with really great ideas that are really strong pedagogically, as well as giving you an opportunity to share what you have done. So really do that. And that's a great way to get a little bit of energy from your colleagues. And I also wanted to say, again, based on this research, that this is also a way to make sure that, and it's important to make sure that you connect with others, that you're not alone in this process. And in my experience, and some of you may be able to confirm this in your own thinking, is that actually we're very generous. Actually, the early childhood education and care community is very generous with our time and support. So reach out to your colleagues. People really support each other when it comes down to really tricky times. And yesterday, in fact, I was talking to an educator colleague who was having a bit of a tricky time. She got an email from a parent that really sort of devastated her, and she was feeling pretty low. And just a conversation with each other on the phone was enough to make her feel a little bit better. And I know I've benefited from that in my time too, when educator colleagues have reached out to me and just checking in to see whether I'm okay. And I think increasingly there are are good supports available. Some of you work in organisations that have employee programs, assistance programs, and others of you can access that support through your community. So really an important thing to know you're not alone. And hey, this is what this is. This is an opportunity here for us to be able to talk to each other and say, what do you need? Talk to the people online about the things that you think you need. Get connected to the Facebook page. Talk to each other about the things that you're grappling with, the questions you have, and I'll talk a little bit more about social media in a minute. But some social media can be a really fantastic way for us to really feel like we're not alone. So these ideas are really important, I think, to think about in terms of determining the way that you will build your own resilience, so that you can in turn build a strong connection to your own practice as family daycare educators, but also to think about how you might build your resilience moving forward. So speaking of which, I want to now get a bit more practical and say, I'm trying to be very practical generally, because I think wellbeing can be thought about as a very sort of nebulous idea, something very broad, but I think we do need to say, well, what can you actually do? What are the things and the strategies that we might put in place? So what I want to suggest is that there are a collection of things that we can do to support our own wellbeing. So this is about taking time to think about this. Now, some of these things, of course, you will have already got happening. So you are really strong in these areas. Others, maybe not so much. So this is a time to make a little plan for yourself and to say, I'm going to write down this and I'm going to maybe try and stretch myself a little bit and see whether I can take a little bit more action in this space. We do want to be a bit proactive in this, and I'm not suggesting by any means that this is only the responsibility of educators. It is the responsibility of the sector itself, the big, broad sector, but also our organisations, but we could all play a contributing part. I remember reading something from the OECD, be sort of thinking about economic development and thinking about the well-being of communities and the economics of well-being, and their understanding of well-being is that the more people are a part of it, organisations, individuals, communities, families, etc., the more we can actually all contribute to the sense of well-being that sustains us moving forward. And these last couple of years, for many of us in the community, not everybody, but for many of us, have really invited us to think differently about wellbeing. What do we mean by that? How do we monitor it? How do we understand it? What can we do to make sure that we are thinking about our own wellbeing? So let's just take a little dive into here. And again, I want to suggest that there's a couple of these that I think are particularly meaningful, and I want to take a bit more of a dive into. So the orange ones that are on the screen now, I'm going to take a bit more of a dive into. But before we get to those ones, I just want to mention the other ones. And there's increasingly, I think, an invitation for you to know what we mean about wellbeing. So do your research, think about that, use all the platforms that you have available to you, particularly BU. And again, we'd love to connect to you to BU and the program there, because that BU program, for those of you who don't know about that BU program, BU, BE, and then a separate word, U, yeah, as in you. So that program is funded through the Commonwealth Government and is undertaken in a collaboration between Beyond Blue and Early Childhood Australia, looking very particularly at early childhood wellbeing, both children and educators. So look at that information and know a bit more about what you're talking about, because I guess one of the things that's really important here is if you're going to address wellbeing and think about tuning into yourself and thinking about your own wellbeing, it's really important that you know what we're talking about. So you know what we mean by that, because otherwise it's this big term and then we think, I don't really quite know what it is and whether am I feeling a sense of wellbeing or not. So the more we know about it, the better it is. And again, there's such good resources out there. Again, your own community might have resources that are really helpful. If you know a website or you know some resources that are really important, then can you put them in the chat? If you've got some really good ways, and I don't know, Rochelle and the team might also have some links. Family Daycare New South Wales might also have some places that they would suggest people have a look at. But I do think knowing more about it, both from a children and family perspective, but also in particular particular about your own perspective. Our schools in our community have got better at this. Our whole communities, governments have got better at this and sharing more information. Just yesterday, I was tuning into some sort of political announcements that there's more money being invested into mental health and wellbeing in the community broadly. So again, you know, if you know some things, share it with your colleagues. So that one's a really important one. I think also the opportunity to think together is a really important one. So this is what today is about. This is about a way to come together and think about what we mean by what we say. So any opportunities for you to do in reflective practice or professional learning are a way to connect to wellbeing. So all of the PD in your pocket stuff that you've been doing, stuff, that doesn't sound like a technical term, does it? All the professional learning that you've been doing in PD in your pocket, all the work that you do with your own services, all the work that you do with your own colleagues, and all the work that you would do with your coordinator team, that's also thinking together. So make sure it's on the agenda, talk to each other, think together about what you understand about wellbeing. Also in this process, know about wellbeing, but build our collective knowledge. So this is about strategies. This is about what we're doing today too. We're going, okay, this helps, and that helps. I want to know more. So knowledge is power, as I said before. Know more, and then you feel equipped and better able to be able to navigate, and indeed better able to make a plan. So one of the things that I'm going to suggest to you today is that you do make a plan about your own wellbeing, that you say, which one of these do I want to do more of? Which one do I think is important for me as a family daycare educator? If I'm feeling a little bit overwhelmed, if I'm feeling a little bit like my cup is empty, if I feel like I'm really tired and I feel a bit low in this context, I don't feel like that sparky energy that I usually have when I'm working in family daycare, then a plan to think about how you might get the support you need, what other things you might do in this space, I think is really powerful and important. So we're going to now take a bit of a dive into some of these particular aspects that I think are particularly important. If we had 3 days to talk about it, we could spend 1 day on each one of these because they are such a sort of big ideas in the early childhood landscape and in family daycare. But let's just take a couple of moments to have a look at some of these. And again, really tuning into some of the research evidence around wellbeing generally. And I know we're a bunch of busy people, but I would recommend, and some of you have already put this in the chat already, that you are really making sure that there are times when you can just tune in and be fully present. So this is about just slowing down, really slowing down. And here I'm quoting Anne Pello, who's just an extraordinary educator who's very, very good at reminding us about slowing down. So the only instruction she says here is to be in a place with a child, seems to me to be wholeheartedly attentive and genuinely present. So you just stop all the rest of the palaver and you are engaging with children. It actually helps with your purpose as well, but it just gives you that reboost, you know, that regrouping opportunity. The way that children do, they can really connect us. And isn't it fortunate that we get to hang out with children and they can help boost us? But I do think generally slowing down, spending some time in your backyard with children on the grass, looking at the sky, looking at the clouds. If you are going out and about into the community, sort of taking a bit longer, wandering through your community, taking a picnic and enjoying that process. But I think family daycare educators are in a unique position to really slow down through the day and engage with children and families and the community in ways that maybe your centre-based colleagues don't get as much opportunity to do. So really enjoy that and really slow down this. Here's one interesting thing that I've noticed in the time of COVID in my conversations with many people is that they have said, actually, it's given us permission to slow down and to do less things. And I actually think there's some merit in that, you know. I think we need to think about what are we not going to do anymore that just makes us really busy and we just feel like we're overwhelmed by lots of things. Can we just slow down and do really, really the things that matter and that are really important? And for me, they're fundamentally about relationships. So the more time we can spend with each other, the more time we can spend tuning into children, the better our sense of well-being will be. It sounds like a no-brainer, doesn't it? But we can sometimes get really distracted by a whole range of other things. And sometimes it's really just important to go, no, I'm stopping now, and I'm just going to tune in to the children that I work with and to be really fully present. This is a very good idea generally. Some of our wellbeing experts out there remind us to notice, to really look at things. I remember one day last year when right in the middle of COVID lockdowns, lockdown number 723 in Melbourne, I went for a walk and I noticed the raindrops on a beautiful banksia, and it was such a beautiful moment. I took a photo of it. I remember that. And whenever I go past that tree, I always think, oh, that's that time that I took that photo. So it just fills me up a little bit with a sense of being present and being in the moment. This is good pedagogical practice, of course. It's not only good for your wellbeing, but it's good for children's learning. So great practices to get into. And again, some of you have got beautiful places in your own homes, little nooks and crannies, and a gorgeous couch, or a space on the deck, or a space outside in the backyard where you can be fully present with children and to take a moment to do that yourself as well. So really good advice. And if that's a challenge for you, then see if you can plan it. Say, I'm going to plan to do this. It's this meditation idea that many of you are talking about. Lots of, so many gardeners in the chat at the moment, I think. So lots of people who are enjoying nature. So a really good way of connecting and being fully present. Here's another idea. And again, if we had lots of time, we could talk a lot about it. But it is about not taking it personally, but also thinking about your own influence. And again, this bit of work is really helpful to think about. It's the ways in which you can tune into your sphere of influence. So what can you actually change and what can't you change? And lots of things are out of our control. I don't know whether you've noticed, but we can't control them. And unless we just make everybody the Prime Minister tomorrow, you are not going to be able to change some things. And we need to be able to just tune into the things that are in the blue circle, that smallest blue circle, which is the things that are within our control. And some of the things that we can do within our control give us a sense of agency and help us understand that we can change some things. And you know what we're not going to do? Worry about the things that we can't control. We might be a part of the conversations around things that were within our influence. So we can be a part of conversations, maybe at your service, your family daycare scheme, your talking to your coordination team. You can be part of your influence, but then there's some things that you can control. So you can control when you have lunch. You can control when if you are going to go at 11:30 or 11:45. You can decide some of those things. You can decide whether you will do this or will do that in your own home. Some of the things you can influence, i.e. some of the things around pedagogical documentation, you can be part of those conversations in your own service, but some things are out of our control. If we worry about the things that are out of our control, we'll put a lot of energy into things we can't change. So we want to put the energy we've got available to us, and this is helping our bank of the bank of wellbeing resources that we have available to us. If we put the bank of wellbeing resources we have available to us into things we can't change, it will sap us of energy. But if we can put our wellbeing energy and our wellbeing resources into the things that are within our control, we can change things, and we can also be influential here. But this here, outside of your control, you can think about it from time to time, but putting way too much energy in it saps your wellbeing. So concentrate your energy here and be a part of the conversations here. It's a really interesting way of thinking about it. It's a question that you might ask from time to time. Is that within my control? Is that within my influence? Is that within my control? Yes, it is within my control. So I can make a decision about that. Is it something that I can influence? Yes, I can ring up someone and have a conversation about that. Is it something that's outside of my control? Yes, it is. if I worry about it too much, I would have put a huge amount of energy into that, which saps my well-being. So it's a really interesting way to think about it. I'm going to share these slides, by the way. I should have said that at the beginning, shouldn't I? I'm going to share these slides so you can have a bit of a look at it and just re-examine those ideas and see what you think. But a really good bit of information, I think, to help us think through our own sphere of influence. The other one that I want to just highlight particularly, and I've said this a couple of times already, is know our purpose. What is our purpose? Come back to the things, if you like, come back to our heartland, come back to the things we really know. And there's lots of places we can find our purpose. We can find it through our colleagues, but I always like to go back to big things like the EYLF and our Alice Springs Education Declaration. It's to make sure that children get the very best possible start in life and that they are successful lifelong learners and that they're active and informed members of our community. And we do this every day. And I feel like if we come back to our purpose in that space, then we really generates an energy around what it is we want to do. Now, some of this, of course, is in the form of your philosophy. You can get it from Belonging, Being and Becoming, In My Time, Our Place. It might come in the form of your service or from your local community. But if you feel like your purpose is waning, so it's not really in its fine shape, you might want to give it a shot of adrenaline. So really make sure that support the conversations moving forward. So what is your purpose? Why are you here? And ask that question and have that conversation with your colleagues, I think, is a really powerful thing to do. And the last thing I want to say, and I think is a very important one here, is please get help if you need it. This is not a competition for rescuing yourself. This is not a competition for being the most stoic and the most, do it by yourself confident person. This is about talk to your manager, talk to your leader, talk to your support person, whatever their name is. They've got all different roles, but who are they? And talk to them. If you have an employee assistance program, check in with those people and use that system. I've really encouraged people to access psychological support if they need it, because this is what it's for. And if we don't do that as early childhood educators, then we're sending a message to children that when you need help, you don't get it and you don't seek it. And I want to really encourage us to talk really openly when we're feeling a bit overwhelmed, but also to get the help we need. And this is not about a weakness, it's about courage, and it's about wanting to say, actually, today I'm feeling not as okay as I normally do, and I want to just see whether I can get some assistance. You can talk to BU. I said before, there's a resource there that's many resources available for educators. Beyond Blue, there's a whole range of different supports available in the online context. Talk to your friends and family. You're a family daycare educator, so your family is a very important part of this. So they need to talk to you about how you're traveling. And of course, if you feel like those things are not working, then please reach out to your general practitioner. Your GP is a really good space to talk to about how you're feeling in terms of these really complex times. But getting help is a sign of professionalism. Getting help is actually something we do. When we say this to children all the time, get help if you need it, be available to help that's around you and supports you so that you can really feel stronger as you move forward. And as we said right at the beginning, the stronger you feel and the more resilient you feel and the stronger your understanding of your own well-being, the better the outcomes for young children in this space. And I'm just going to leave you here, and I think Rachel and Rochelle, and the team might be monitoring to see if there's any questions coming through. But I'm really conscious of time, and I want you to leave you with some of these things that you can think a little bit about in terms of yourself. But here's a beautiful poem to leave you with. Instructions for living a life. Pay attention, be astonished, and tell about it. Thanks very much, everybody. It's been fantastic to hang out with you, and I wish you all the best as you navigate the rest of 2021 and look forward to some really great opportunities with children and families in family daycare in 2022. Thanks, everybody.